Welcome to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, a podcast where we talk about the Constitution, politics, history, and pretty much anything else I want to talk about. And you'll find that tonight is pretty much else category. This podcast can be found on AnnetteTalks.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube.com/Annette Talks if you want to see us in video. And you can find me on Facebook at Annette Talks, or Facebook.com/Annette Talks. So pretty much just Google Annette Talks, you'll find me. And tonight we are going to be talking about emotional abuse, how to recognize it, what to do about it. And I have a special guest on tonight, Mr. Brandon Pipkin. How are you doing, Brandon?
Thank you. Very well. Thanks for having me on.
You know what? I have to confess that your name makes me want to go into an English accent.
Is that right?
Brandon Pipkin. That sounds very British to me, Mr. Pipkin.
I think I am the kin of Pip. Right? Doesn't that make sense? I'm the offspring of somebody named Pip.
Yes, that doesn't. Pipkin, you are right. See, already off on tangents. And I want to disclose to my listeners that probably one of the reasons why I'm going to be a little bit over the top silly tonight is because it's how I deal with difficult topics. And this topic of emotional abuse is personal to me. And so that's one of my coping mechanisms. So if you're thinking, oh, how inappropriate she's being with all of her humor, that's what's going on. Just a little FYI. So the reason that I decided to cover this topic this month was because I saw Brandon's little blurb on Facebook about October being, is it Emotional Abuse Awareness Month?
Domestic Violence Awareness.
Okay, thank you. And actually, most of my listeners, I believe, are members of the LDS Church. And if you are, take a look at October's Ensign, and you'll see that there are actually articles about emotional abuse. I haven't gotten further to know if there's physical abuse, but I know that there's articles on emotional abuse, because right away I was like, oh no, I got to deal with this topic. And so it's obviously a very important one, and that was really brought home to me when I posted on Facebook that I was going to be doing this episode and asked if anyone had questions. What was funny was that I thought, I'm not going to get any questions on this, because sometimes I'll put a topic up there and I won't get any questions. I was completely wrong. It was totally the opposite. I think I had 26 questions or something. And it drove home to me how prevalent this problem is and how many people are out there trying to deal with it and are struggling with it. And so I sent those questions to Brandon. And so Brandon, you're going to tell us, because first of all, I need to introduce you and who you are and why you're here talking about this before.
I think we should just jump in.
Well, I'm going to read your bio that you sent to me, so I'll cover all the bases. If you think something's, I almost want to do it in British accent. If you think something's wrong in your relationship, there is. As an abuse recovery coach, Brandon can help you make sense of the confusion in your relationship and understand if what you've been experiencing is normal and what to do about it if not. If you're walking on eggshells, and there's an expression that I have to say right now that totally resonated with me, because I used to tell my sister this all the time back when I was in the previous relationship, that I felt like I was walking on eggshells. And I didn't know. Who knew? Like I was one of millions. Anyway, if you're walking on eggshells, there's hope. Brandon's insight has helped thousands of people gain clarity. He speaks both as an expert and a friend, since he gets the frustration and pain of a confusing relationship. You can replace frustration with peace and conflict with happiness if you learn a few key ideas. Follow him to learn how to live a better, happier, more fulfilling life. Find resources, videos, quizzes, and help at www.stopemotionalabuse.net, on Insta at stop.emotional.abuse, and Pinterest, pinterest.com/stopemotionalabuse, and facebook.com/stopemotionalabuse.coach. And then there's a / I think. Anyway, I will share all those links in the show notes in case people didn't grab a pen and write all that down.
Yeah, sure they did not.
But the main,
I feel like I have to be,
go stopemotionalabuse.net, right?
That's exactly right. Yep, and everything is there. I feel like I need to be on every social platform though, because I know people in abusive relationships tend to stick to one that they feel safe with, and so I'm trying to make sure there are resources and ways to get to those resources no matter who needs them.
That makes sense. And I went on the stopemotionalabuse.net website today and spent a long time going through some of the different quizzes and articles, and I learned a lot that I didn't know. And there were a lot of good resources. And I thought I knew, because I've already been in this situation, I thought I knew everything, but I didn't. So I highly recommend that people that are in a relationship they feel like might be emotionally abusive, if you're even questioning it, probably is, I'm just guessing.
There you go.
Go to that website.
Yeah.
So Brandon, I sent you that list of questions on Facebook, and you said you wanted to basically do this sort of explanation, starting with how these people get together, the abuser and the abusee.
That's right.
First place.
Yeah, so to the point that you've just made, the first question we got is, how do you know when you're in an emotionally abusive relationship? And the thing is, if you think you might be, you probably are. If you're questioning it, if you've ever Googled, why does he do this? Why does she do that? Is this normal? You are in an abnormal relationship, most likely. And so one of the resources that I have at stopemotionalabuse.net is a questionnaire. It's on the questionnaire tab, or go to stopemotionalabuse.net/questionnaire. And you can look at that questionnaire to fill it out and see how many yes answers you get. And there's a key there that can help you understand what may be happening in your relationship.
I can tell you that I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I circled 10 of them as out of, I think 26.
30.
30, sorry.
Yep.
So, because didn't you say, how many do you need to have?
I say if there's more than 5, you should really take a look at the relationship.
Yeah.
Because if you're experiencing even one of these, it's enough for me to say, is that something you want to live with in your relationship? It's things like gaslighting. And we'll get into what that is, but it's all times when you're being disrespected. And so if there's disrespect in your relationship, I think it's good to look at it at any point and see, is this what I want to deal with? Is this something that seems to be within the realm of what seems normal or acceptable? And we got to be careful about normal, but let me get into that part there that we talked about with how the abuser and how the abusee get together, because I think that sets a lot of context and will answer a lot of the questions that we got. And anybody that's listening, I think it will help them understand their own experience a little bit. So the way that the abuser and the abusee get together is that each of them has had messages growing up that who they are, how they are, what they do is not good enough. They got some message that they are not measuring up. The abuser will internalize that message and lock that pain away so deeply inside and resolve to never access it again, that they become like their abuser. So somebody in their life gave them that message and it was an abuser. And it doesn't always have to be somebody who is physically abusive. We often equate abuse to physical. That's not the only kind of abuse. I think we're all waking up to that, and I really hope we are. There's financial abuse, withholding funds from you, making sure you don't have equal access to equal money in the relationship, those kinds of things. There's also emotional abuse. There's psychological abuse, which is sometimes synonymous with emotional abuse. So whoever this person was gave them that message, and the abuser resolved, I will never feel that way again. So they lock this pain and hurt and frustration away and resolve to never feel that way again. And as a result, they put up this wall around their ego to make sure that they never again feel weak, inadequate, or worth less. And what I mean by worth less is not worthless, worth less than they feel right now.
You know what? I want to ask you a question real quick.
Please.
Just thinking back on my own experience. And before we started recording, you mentioned that you often call the abuser a narcissist. And
Yeah.
I've heard that, and from what I've seen, I don't think that my abuser was a narcissist, but this might be the same. It might not matter for what I'm going to ask you. Do you think that the abuser can ever really change? Because I've heard that narcissists can never really change.
Yes.
And I have seen some narcissists. I've had family members married to narcissists, and those people are never going to change. That person is now dead, but and now probably is changing because he's dead. But I guarantee you he would never have changed in this lifetime. But I've also heard that narcissists just do not have the capacity to change. Do you think that's the case with all abusers? That
Your question is perfectly timed because I just mentioned that they lock away that pain and hurt and resolve to never access it.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that would create a change within the abuser is the one thing they're not willing to do. Take an honest look at themselves and see where change might be in order. If they were to look at themselves and see that a change might be in order, it would mean that something is wrong with them, which would then cause them to feel weak, inadequate, or worth less. They can't separate this thing that I did is wrong or this part of me can use repair. They can't separate those from I am at my intrinsic level flawed. There's no separation. So anything that threatens that is an existential threat. So looking at where they could change and do better is an existential threat. And that's why most narcissists, and we have the data that shows this, they don't change. Now, let me state, I unequivocally believe in the atonement of Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the power to change hearts that it has. But that heart has to be willing to change. And that's why I just have not seen enough evidence to sway me to believing that somebody who has established themselves in those abusive patterns will change. I haven't seen it. I know one, maybe two that have apologized and changed.
But out of several.
Out of lots.
You know what? It makes me feel bad for the abuser. Not that I will ever go back into a relationship with one, but
Heavens no.
it makes me also glad that, because I know you're now going to get to the second, to the abused person,
Yep.
And why they go there. Because I've heard the same thing. It's like two sides of the same coin. They both were raised to not feel good about themselves, but they responded to opposite
That's right.
ways.
That's
it
right.
makes me grateful that I became the abused instead of the abuser and took that path.
Yes.
Because even though I hate the fact that I took that path, I have been able to make changes in my life since I got out of that relationship. And I can feel the changes. I can see the changes. Plus, I don't abuse. I'm not an abuser.
That's right.
And so I'm grateful that I can change and that I'm not an abuser. And so, that feels like...
Yeah, right? Yeah.
I never actually put that together until just now talking to you.
Awesome. That is so wonderful. Not only do you have the capacity to change, you have the willingness to change because you were on the other side of that. Yeah. The flip side of that.
And I would never want to put anyone else through what I've been put through.
You never would. Never. No.
So if I ever even see anything remotely like that in myself, I'm like, no.
Right. No. And you've got so much more compassion for other people, so much more understanding. It really does help open your eyes when you understand what you went through, what you suffered. And let's talk about this. And you're getting at something that I think is really important. I hate to use the word victim.
Yes.
Now, if you have suffered abuse, you are a victim. But if you identify as such, that becomes your mentality. And then you don't take the opportunity to change, to get better, to become a survivor. I like that word better. I just simply call them someone who was abused. Because it's not who you are, it's part of your story. Right. Someone who was abused.
Well, and the thing is, the people that I've seen that are abusers are actually the ones that are victims. They cast themselves as victims. It's, I can't change this.
So good. They're so good at that. Yes.
And so when I see someone with a victim mentality, I'm like, I run far away because I'm like, why? You've given your power away, which means you're never going to change because you don't see yourself as in control of your life. So you're never gonna move forward. You're never gonna become better than you are right now because you see yourself as powerless.
That's right.
So, yeah, I actually see the abuser as the victim because they cast themselves in that mold.
Well, yes, and in addition to that, they will always want to play the victim to other people because then it gets them sympathy. It maintains their image, which again maintains their not look weak, inadequate, or worthless. And if they're the victim, it means they don't have to change.
Yeah. Somebody else has to do the changing.
Correct. I'm okay. I don't need to change anything. In fact, I know somebody whose spouse would always say to them, when the spouse brought up something that really hurt them, this person would say, well, I don't know what you expect me to do. I couldn't have done anything differently. That's how I operate. Or that was the best decision in that moment. And the spouse would say, well, maybe could you do this next time? And they would say, well, I just operate in the moment and we'll see what happens. That's not a relationship. Friends, okay? If you have something like that going on in your relationship, let me tell you, that's not healthy. Now, I'm not going to use the word normal. I think I used it earlier and then quickly moved off of it. Normal is this really amorphous concept. Healthy is what we want. So let's talk healthy tonight, but let me first, talk about the abused. So the abuser gets this message over here, locks it away. Over here, the person who later on gets abused is actually being abused in some way within their home because they're getting messages probably from a parent, maybe an older sibling sometimes, but very rarely. It's a parent, maybe a grandparent that has a lot of influence and is always around. And they send the message, you're not good enough as you are. The same message that the abuser gets. But this person, instead of locking it away, decides, well, I don't like feeling this way. I don't like being in trouble. I don't like feeling like who I am is not good enough. So maybe if I change enough, I can please that person. And what you do is you become highly sensitive. And you'd mentioned the work of, who is it?
Matt Townsend, who I had on the podcast before. We did an episode on high sensitivity. Yeah. And how when you are highly sensitive, you take in 4 times more information through your senses. And so take that and then compound it, because I'm highly sensitive, and you compound that with being abused, and then it's like you're on overdrive. Because what's funny, now that you mentioned it, we talked about this before the episode, but when I'm in a situation where other people are fighting, like there's a couple fighting, oh my gosh, I'm like, that's when this whole PTSD thing kicks in.
You feel it.
Yeah. And I want to go in the other room. I want to somehow make it okay so that they'll stop fighting without like intruding. It's just.
Yes. Yes. So the reason that happens, right, is you become, and you probably were, and when I say you, I mean the abused person, they probably were from birth a little bit. And then it gets finely tuned because you're around an abuser and you don't want to set them off. So you become highly sensitive and highly attuned to their feelings so that you can be one step ahead of them and do what they need you to do in order to not get mad at you. So you put on this mask, you become a different person, and you become a people pleaser, willing to do whatever it takes to keep that person happy. And you're highly sensitive or empathic to their feelings. You're always trying to sense their feelings because you don't want to get in trouble. That's the worst thing ever, because if you get in trouble, what it means is you're not approved of, and you hate that feeling. So you get really good at this over here, making somebody else happy who constantly tells you you're not good enough. Well, guess what happens when this person comes walking out in public? First thing they do is something called love bombing, which is this crazy phenomenon where they just absolutely overwhelm you with you're perfect, you're wonderful, you're amazing. Now, in contrast to the message you got that you're not good enough, how does that feel?
Yeah.
Holy moly. Yeah. Right? And that's awesome.
Somebody really likes me.
I am the bee's knees. This is awesome, right? It feels so good. The reason that they do that, it's a form of manipulation. And I've come to the firm conclusion that they are not doing it consciously, but they are doing it purposely. It's not conscious. It's like this mating mechanism. Oh, here's somebody who's weak, and you sniff each other out. It's crazy. Somehow you sniff each other out. They need somebody to manipulate and control. Who better than somebody who's always willing to do whatever it takes? So you get together, and the bully will keep this up. I call them bullies, abusers. And yeah, you touched on the term narcissist. Now, technically, for somebody to be a narcissist, they have to meet 5 of the 12 criteria on the DSM list of narcissistic traits. I use them interchangeably because anybody who's been abused has experienced narcissistic traits and tendencies. So anyway, this person will keep it up for as long as it takes to suck this person in. And once you're in, now we get the abuse cycle where the person gives you just enough to keep you hanging on and make you think the old them is coming back. We call that intermittent reinforcement. And then they'll go into their rage that confuses the all heck out of you. And what do? Because you don't want someone to rage at you. What do?
You do whatever it takes to keep it happy. But you know what? Also that cycle, this is the ironic thing about the cycle, is that the abuser abuses you, and then you feel horrible, and you need to be comforted. And so who do you go to? You go to the abuser. They comfort you, make you feel better for a little while, and then, oh, lo and behold, the abuse starts again. I mean, I can look back and see that. I'm like, oh, that is such a pathetic, vicious cycle. But yeah, because when you're down in the dumps, you need someone to make you feel better. And so at first you're very angry with them, but then you're still hurt. You're hurt, and you need to be comforted. this is your spouse, this is your
That's
partner,
right.
whoever, that's their job. And so they're going to do it because they need to keep you around.
And the other side of that is that abuser will make you feel badly because they gaslight. So I'm throwing out all these terms for your listeners, right? If you don't know what these terms are, when you start to recognize these terms and you start to see, oh, maybe this is part of my experience, at first it's very deflating because you realize, wow, I think something crazy really has been happening and my gut is right. But the reason I throw out these terms is I want people to have the truth. I want them to get the help and resources they need. So look up gaslighting. It's all on the website too. If you want to go there, just do a search. Gaslighting, intermittent reinforcement. I have a section for common terms. So what the abused will do, or the abuser will do, is they will gaslight you into thinking that whatever the conflict is, it's your fault anyway, whatever it is. Because again, they can't take responsibility.
Here's the big one. You pushed my button.
Correct. You heard that, right? Yeah.
Button must be like 3 feet wide and 3 feet tall, because all I have to do is make a wrong move, like accidentally, and I'm touching your button. Your button's so ginormous. I can't avoid your darn button.
So contrast that. You remember that couple I talked about earlier? Well, I don't know what I could have done differently versus you push my buttons, right? Okay, I can't do anything differently, but you have to do everything perfectly. That's the message, right? And so this confusing message of gaslighting comes in, and you really wonder, well, maybe I am not a good person. I know another couple that one of them, actually the same couple, that she said to him, I always thought, and she was the abuser, I always worried that if I broke down on the road somewhere, you wouldn't come to get me. Now that hurts to hear a guy to hear that, right? Well, the husband starts thinking about it, and he's like, well, wait a minute. I have asked you consistently throughout our marriage to help with family home evening, to make a phone call for me here and there, to do little things for me. And it was always, I'm too busy. Do it yourself. You should do that. You need to fulfill your own needs. So when he needed something, you're on your own. But when she needed something, we're a team. Okay. You get that message enough and you start to wonder, well, maybe I really am a bad person. Would I really go and rescue her? Well, of course you would, but you have to wonder, because if your own spouse doesn't know that, man, I must be a terrible person. So anyway, I get really ramped up when I talk about this because I really want people to have the truth. I really want them to understand what's going on, and I get passionate about this. So the abuser will gaslight you into thinking it's your fault anyway. So you want to comfort them. So you're looking for comfort. And by the way, you want them to approve of you. That's what you're chasing the whole time in the relationship anyway, is their approval. So you don't want the conflict, and they know you don't want the conflict. That's why they picked you. That's why they start conflicts, so that you'll end them by worshiping them and doing whatever they want you to. So you go to comfort them because you want comfort from them, because you want to know that you're approved, and they love you to worship them and come to them. And when they've had enough and you're too close because they can't do emotional intimacy, because they can't look weak, inadequate, or worthless, they can't do emotional intimacy, they're going to push you away. We call that the distancer pursuer, or the abuse cycle. Intermittent reinforcement starts all over.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I could see the cycle, but I didn't know why it was there.
Yes. So that was the long explanation. Sorry, I was trying to get through that a little.
Yeah, no, that was good. There's just so much. There's so much to this topic.
Yeah.
All right, what's the next question?
What are you thinking? Yeah, do you want to go to one? What are you thinking? Let's do that first.
What am I thinking? I'm just, because it's such a personal one for me. I'm deeply. I'm going into some of this stuff. One of the things that I found on your website was the CPTSD, right?
Yep.
And it says also sometimes referred to as CPTSR, complex post-traumatic stress disorder or response.
Yep.
And it says a legitimate form of PTSD developed from being in an abusive situation can cause feelings of depression, anxiety, shame, worthlessness, helplessness, physical ailments, and other related feelings and symptoms, including amnesia or improved recall of traumatic events.
Yeah.
That is why it's sometimes hard to remember some abuse and why the memory of other abuse is more pronounced. Anyway, that just keeps coming to me because, well, first of all, I probably experienced all those feelings: shame, depression, anxiety, worthlessness, helplessness, physical ailments, yada, yada. But also, like I shared with you before we started recording, everything that happened in that relationship for me, that was been years ago now, is like buried. I almost never bring it up. And I had to bring it up a while back for a certain thing that I had to do.
Yep.
And bringing it up was hard, first of all, because I've buried it. I have no use for it. I don't want it. I don't want it around.
Yeah, no.
And so I almost thought that's almost like amnesia, in that, like, I really have to go searching. I have to almost journal. I have to go back to my,
Yes.
if I go back to my journal, it's completely full of it. Like it's all
That's right.
like all those years are full of it. But
Yeah.
I don't recall it now unless I absolutely am forced to.
Yeah.
Until if something happens, like the abuser a few years back let loose on me, and everything came rushing back. And so I'm like, oh, I have PTSD. I never thought about it before.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I just think it's interesting that you can bury some of that stuff. But now, as we're talking about it, like, I can feel stuff. Memories are coming up for me.
And I bet, correct me if I'm wrong, yes, memories are coming up in your conscious mind, but more than that, your body is responding, and you're feeling that pit in your stomach and that tightness in your chest.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a definite anxiety, like fight or flight response feeling going on right now. But I'm very grateful that I'm out of it and have been out of it for several years. And so I want people to know this is something that you can get out of, and that you can go and do the work afterwards. You do not have to stay with the abuser. You do not.
Yep.
That's why I wanted to do this, because I could have used a Brandon Pitkin to coach me through this when I was in this relationship.
Yeah, the unfortunate part is, or fortunate for you maybe, is that I didn't know this stuff in that time period. Let me unpack some of what you said, and let me also, before I do that, let everybody know there is hope and healing. There is. And one of the video series that I do is I interview people who have been abused about their childhood, how they got into that relationship, when they knew something was wrong, when they knew it was time to leave, what help and resources have helped them to heal and move forward. And I call that series Hope and Healing After Abuse. So you can listen to a bunch of different stories of people who have been in and gotten out. I want to unpack what you talked about. The human mind tends to forget traumatic experiences that happen insidiously, which is what abuse is typically. Insidious meaning so small over time, incremental, that we just don't even realize it's happening. As we talked earlier, I mentioned to you, it's like the frog in the boiling water. If you put a frog in a pot of cool water, you turn up the heat and slowly heat it up, frog doesn't jump out. It's a gradual movement toward the new normal. You drop a frog into a boiling pot of water, the frog immediately is going to try to get out. The abuse happens so small, little by little, and you're being gaslighted all the way through to make it look like it's not abuse and different things. In fact, I have a friend who, she's now divorced. He came up to her and just accosted her at this public place. And she said, I'm not talking about this right now. And he said, I'm not harassing you. Now, who says I'm not harassing you when they haven't even been accused of harassment?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Right? It's somebody who's trying to gaslight you into thinking this is a normal conversation. It was not a normal conversation. He accosted her with a child there, demanded an answer of her, all the intimidating postures, and she refused. And he said, I'm not harassing you. Well,
wow.
Okay, you in your mind know that you're harassing, and so you're trying to gaslight and you're trying to downplay because you're not a harasser. You don't want to be seen that way because that's weak, inadequate, or worthless. So anyway, we throw those memories out, or we block them out because we don't want the feeling associated with them. But here's the thing. When we stuff down our emotions, we can't stuff down selectively. And what we do is we start to stuff everything down. We start to feel less. And in our relationships, we start to wonder, is there any hope? And we start to feel that malaise, that depression, that anxiety from CPTSD. The body knows it's there. And if we don't journal it 3, 4, 5 years later, you may wonder, well, was it really that bad? Did I make it up? Did I just think it was this way? Journaling, I cannot speak enough about. I am a huge proponent of it because it will help you understand clearly what's happening in your relationship. It will help you understand when they gaslight you. I should probably define gaslighting. It's when they change the story to make you wonder, am I the one going crazy? Just look at politicians. They do this all the time.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
I never said that. But we have a video of it from 2 months ago. Seriously. But they want to make you think in the moment whatever is clever. And that's what abusers do too. So I'm so glad you journaled.
Mm-hmm.
Forgetting those things, forgetting some of those incidences is totally normal. And it's normal to have a heightened remembrance of some of the occurrences because they were so traumatic.
Yep. Oh yeah, because we were talking beforehand about birthday parties.
Yep.
I can remember one of my kids' first birthday parties, like it was yesterday, and that was 11 years ago. So
11
yeah,
years ago.
and there are a few. Oh yeah, there are a few other times that are coming right back. But the daily, almost daily stuff is back there, is hidden
Yep.
back there, and.
Yep.
Like I have to echo journaling, because journaling during that time was very helpful to me. But also, yeah, if I'm ever thinking, was I imagining that? All I have to do is go back to that time period.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, it's all laid out there, and I just leave it there. But also
Yep.
now that I'm years past it, I found that journaling is one of the best things you can do for
Yes.
so many aspects of your life. And part of that is because I heard a quote sometime in one of my podcasts. Someone quoted an author that said, someone asked me how I felt about that. And I said, I don't know. I haven't written about it yet. And I had a counselor tell me it's because it forces your brain to slow down. And so if it forces your brain to slow down as you're writing it, then as you're writing, it helps you work through whatever it is you need to work through as you're writing it down.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I still journal frequently because it helps me. Also, sometimes this is just something to throw out there. Like when I'm having a difficult situation with somebody and I like a guy that I'm trying to get over, let's be honest. Instead of, I don't want to reach out to him because it's over, but I'm not quite over. I will write him a letter.
Yes.
And
Yes.
rip it to shreds.
Uh-huh.
And so writing stuff out has just always been super therapeutic for me. And I highly recommend it for people that don't know how to handle strong emotions.
Absolutely. It is one of the best mental therapeutics there is. So if our physical bodies are ailing, if there's something that needs repair, often exercise, sleep, things like that, proper nutrition can be the balm and the healing that they need. Journaling is to the mental and emotional pieces of us as exercise, sleep, and proper nutrition are to the physical part of us. And I made this note. I talk about journaling all the time with people that I'm coaching, and I forget to tell my kids that they should probably journal stuff out. So I had to make that note.
Also, meditation. I don't know if you talk about that much. I go for long walks every day, about 45 minutes to an hour, no headphones, nothing, in nature. And it's basically like an open prayer / meditation. I'll go out and I'll start talking to Heavenly Father, and I'll just let it go for 45 minutes. And that's how I work through.
So good.
How you get inspiration. Like I don't think people are slowing their brains down enough today.
No.
We spend so much time buried in our electronics.
Correct. We're constantly being fed.
Keeping busy, and not allowing ourselves to. If I had done more long walks during that time, I think it might have been shorter because I would have realized. But when you have small kids and stuff, anyway.
Yeah. No. So let's talk about that, okay? Because people who are typically experiencing this do have younger children. And of course, there are those who are more advanced in their relationships. And I just interviewed a lady last week, 2 weeks ago. She had been married 40 years. Wow. 40 years. And she knew maybe 3 years in, there's something wrong here.
That's so sad.
And it kind of speaks to a couple of things that we should also touch on before I get to that. Anyway, there's like 7 different things that I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, we're probably going to do a second episode because there's just so much. And when we're done with this one and I post it, I'm going to ask you more questions.
That's great.
I'm sure that we're going to open up a lot more questions because there's just so much to this topic.
Yes. So what I was going to mention is this lady stayed in her relationship for so long for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're taught in our culture Now, the doctrine is pure. The doctrine is absolute truth. I have a bedrock testimony of that. Unfortunately, in our culture, we do certain things. And in our culture, we make it taboo to talk about problems in a legitimate way. Not that we need to go spread them all over the place. And our dear bishops and elders quorum presidents and Relief Society leaders, bless their hearts. They're volunteers who don't understand abusive relationships. So this is important to understand it. People, even trained counselors, and I got a video on this, 5 reasons why traditional counseling and wisdom does not work in an abusive relationship. Because they give advice and wisdom such as, well, go back to what attracted you to each other in the first place. Well, the abused would love nothing more than that because that was the love bombing version. Well, the problem is this is the facade. Then the counselor will say, well, you need to be more open with your feelings. Well, guess what? When this person is open, who uses anything they say against them? Anything you say can and will be used against you, right? So traditional counselors who haven't been in it or don't know how to work people through it will give you terrible advice. And so if trained counselors are doing that, bless the hearts of these bishops, Relief Society presidents and leaders, elders quorum presidents. They're not going to be able to necessarily navigate you through it. So they'll tell you things like, well, have you prayed? Have you gone to the temple together? Well, that's a problem, going to the temple with your abuser, because it's so dichotomous, these feelings you're having. Like, this plus this doesn't match. And it adds to that confusion and this whole ball. And because we unfortunately have a culture rife with shame, we feel we can't get out of that relationship because we will be looked down upon. And guess what we grew up with? The abused over here. We grew up with a lot of shame, and that's how we got the message we're not good enough. And probably the abused got that same shame message. Shame is so damaging. And so in one respect, I love Brene Brown's work where she talks about shame and how damning it is. But I don't like some of the thoughts she shares in relation to abuse, because she says you need to be more vulnerable. Well, no, the abused should not be more vulnerable.
Oh, you know, I know when you were saying that before we even got here, I was thinking about that, how we learn to not be vulnerable because our vulnerabilities are used against us.
Absolutely.
Everything. The worst, the abuse, I shouldn't say the worst abuse, but the abuse that stands out to me more, that still rings through my head, is a vulnerability that the abuser knew that I had, and he used it in calling me names. And I would never call him names because I always knew, like Dr. Phil, you know, you always know when your relationship is over when one of you will come after the other person personally and call them names. So I always had that in my head. I'll never call him names. I'll never come at him personally. And I never did. That was always my rule. And yet I got it all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, you know, I was going to use an example. I'm not going to, because I don't want to start crying during this episode, but he would know about vulnerabilities of mine and call me names in relation to them. And it's like being stabbed in the stomach by someone who's supposed to love you and take care.
Correct.
The person who is supposed to be your protector, who's supposed to have your back all the time,
right,
supposed to be your partner, your solid protector, is the one that's trying to kill you. That's what it feels like.
Right. That's
and
right.
So, yeah, you can't be. I agree, and I agree in vulnerability too. But you're right. In an abused situation, you don't want to be vulnerable because they use it against you.
Yep. And the reason that they use that vulnerable spot against you, it goes back to how they grew up. They're never going to look weak, feel inadequate, or worth less. So what they'll do is they'll prey upon your vulnerabilities, your weakest points, because they know they can pull the strings and get you to do whatever they want by manipulating that very sensitive thing.
Yeah, it is insidious. It is.
It's insidious. So if anybody has experienced it.
Can you ever, well, maybe we'll have to get to this in the second episode.
Yeah.
But like the thing that's been in my head in the years since that I got out of that relationship was, will I ever be able to be completely vulnerable with a man in the future?
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that because I don't know. I haven't been to a situation where I've allowed that because I'm so concerned that it's going to be used against me. Like, why, why put myself out there?
And that was one or two of the questions we got is, how do I learn to trust somebody? Can I heal from this? The answer is yes. And we do need to get into it probably in a second episode, because you need to really be ready for the healing to occur. What I've seen so unfortunately, first of all, we deny what's happening because we don't want to see it. We don't want to acknowledge it. The abuse is insidious anyway. When we do see what's happening, we want to run from acknowledging that it's abuse as fast as we can, because we don't want to believe that we were abused. We don't want that to be part of our story. Finally, if we do warm up to that, we want to heal as quickly as possible and just get on with it. And unfortunately, I see it. And again, in our culture, it's unfortunate. We don't want to do the work on ourselves. We just say, well, I've given it to the Lord. And you know what? That's fabulous. That's wonderful. But you giving it to him was not all that was necessary for you to heal. That's what you needed to do to forgive. Now you need to invite him and his grace into your life and his healing power to show you where you need to work so that you don't get into a relationship like that again. Because if you don't heal this stuff that happened initially, you're going to keep sniffing out that person who's going to keep taking advantage of you. It's just what's going to happen. Just giving it to the Lord and saying, oh, you take this one, is not enough work. Faith is work. So let me get to that small kids thing. I don't remember what else I wanted to talk about on that one. Sorry. But back to the small kids thing. So if you've got small kids and you're being abused, you feel so trapped. And somebody mentioned this, right?
I felt like I was in a prison. Honestly.
Yeah.
When my youngest was 4, and I'm giving away too much here, but forgive me if any of you people that are listening know who I'm talking about. I'm not trying to denigrate anyone. I'm just sharing my story. But when my youngest was 4, I remember thinking, only 14 more years.
Yeah.
It felt like a prison sentence.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to and then, something happened and it was not, I was myself. But you feel completely trapped when they're that young, because especially if you're the typical, LDS couple, or even out in the world where the man's making the living and the woman's staying home. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a beautiful concept when it's not an abusive situation and it works. It's awesome.
Correct.
And I have no problem with that. That's the situation I always knew I was going to be in. And that's what I was in. But when you're not making a living and you've got young kids, and the idea of getting out and then trying to make a living for those and take care of them, it's very overwhelming. Because I can tell you all the things that went through my head, like, well, who would take care of the kids while I'm at work? And how would I pay the bills? Like, it was completely overwhelming, where as hard as it was to be in an abusive relationship, it felt easier than what I thought it would be like to get out.
That's right. That is such a common feeling. And I want to acknowledge, you're not trying to throw anyone under the bus, but you do have a story. And it's okay to share your story in a respectful way. If we don't share our stories, this festers. Abuse festers in darkness. The best way to disinfect is to get it into the light. And people have to understand they're not alone. So thank you for doing that. To this point of feeling trapped, that is such a common feeling. So when you said, I had little kids, my walks had to have been shorter if I had even taken walks, right? Mm-hmm. You're so tied to the kids, and then you're so tied to that person who wants you to worship them. You lose sight of who you are, what you want. You have no preferences whatsoever. If you ever did have one, the abuser will make sure that gets swallowed up, because that was a terrible preference anyway, and that was a dumb idea. So you feel trapped in so many different ways, and it is vital in those situations to take care of yourself. Vital. And you will know when you can't do it anymore, because you can't do it anymore. You will know. You'll know when it's time to make a change. But one of the best things to do, and this answers, I think, a few of the questions that we got. One of the best things that you can do for yourself is follow these 7 steps that I've outlined that it takes to heal from an abusive relationship. The first thing you need to do is recognize that something is wrong. Then you need to have a name for it. And that's why I've given the names of gaslighting, intermittent reinforcement, the abuse cycle. Once you can name it, you see, oh, that is what's happening. Okay, like CPTSD for you. Mm-hmm. Oh, I didn't know this term existed. That is what I experienced.
Trauma bonding and forced forgiveness were two of the other things that I didn't know were called. I'm like, oh yeah, I did some of that. I remember that.
You got some of that, right? So trauma bonding is this incredibly confusing bond that happens between the abused and the abuser, which is you start to feel sorry for them and you start to feel like you love them in this way that is so deep and so connected, which doesn't make any sense because they continually push you away. They call you names. They do insanely terrible things to you, but then they do just enough to make you believe that they're not a bad person. And one of the questions we had is it medication? If somebody abuses you because they're on medication, can they change, or is that different? Here's the thing. Abuse is abuse, and you shouldn't be abused. Another question we had was how much abuse is okay? Big fat zero, right? No, and the Lord does not want you to be abused. I will testify to that. Brothers and sisters, the Lord does not want you to be abused. Abuse is against the plan of God. Clearly states that. So no, you don't need to continually be abused, but this trauma bonding happens because you think that they're coming back and maybe them is there and maybe it's not really them that's making these bad choices to abuse you. And so you have this insane bond to them, even though they treat you so terribly. And it's because of that intermittent reinforcement, it rewires your brain. It's crazy. So the 7 steps, you've got to recognize it. You've got to put a name to it. Trauma bonding, forced forgiveness, that kind of thing. And once you have a name, you have to do the hard work to acknowledge and accept that is what happened to me. Once you acknowledge and accept that, you can move toward healing. So then you need to learn about yourself and what led you to that situation in the first place so that you can recognize the red flags. That was another question we had was, well, how can I know if someone is truly abusive or if they're just triggered and defensive? How can I know if it's dysfunctional relationship is fixable? Well, if you're seeing the red flags, if somebody gets triggered and defensive for small things, for things that in a healthy relationship you'd be able to talk through, those are some of the things. But if you don't ever heal yourself, you're going to keep going back. So that's number 4 is you've got to learn about yourself and what led you there. Number 5, you've got to decide what you really want moving forward. Do you want to keep coming back to people and chasing their approval and constantly hustling for your worth and letting somebody else, an imperfect human being, dictate your worth? Step number 6, once you've decided that you don't want that to be part of your story anymore, you can set boundaries. Boundaries are so effective, and we talked about that before, but you don't set boundaries until you decide what you want. That's why these 5 steps have to precede it. Once you set boundaries, now you can heal, consciously heal. Without the boundaries and sticking to the boundaries, though, you can do anything and everything else to try to heal and it won't happen. So you've got to have this foundation behind it so that you're solid when you set the boundary, that you're not going to cave on it. Because as soon as you set a boundary, what does the abuser try to do? Get you to cave on that, because then they'll have a control again. Yeah. The only people who hate you having boundaries are those who benefit from you not having them. And they're used to ramping up their behavior, yelling more, manipulating more to get you to cave because you want what? At all costs, peace.
Yeah, and the boundaries book, I wish that I had that book 10 years ago, but I had it in a different situation.
Yep.
Yeah, I can't recommend that book enough either.
Yep.
I also wanted to say,
it's called Boundaries. That's it.
Yeah, it's called Boundaries. When you talked about how when you're in that situation, you don't know what you want or who you are or whatever, I can attest to that, because when I got out, and I've been out of it for over 5 years, it's been like a renaissance in my life. Mm-hmm. Like I've done, I mean, this podcast, my last podcast, my writing, like, it's like I've become the person that I knew I could be before I got into that relationship. My progress was damned. That's the way I've heard it said. Yes. In another, I saw this Fireside, and she said, when you're in a relationship like this with a narcissist or whoever, your progress is damned, because the entire time that you're in it, all you're doing is trying to stay afloat. All you're doing is trying to stay alive. So you're not moving anywhere. And that's what I felt like. Yeah, it was like this total standstill of just trying to survive during that time period. And now that I'm out of it, it's like, wee, you know, I'm discovering who I am. Like, this is awesome. This is way cool.
It's so wonderful. It's a whole new world. And you really discover things that you had started to shut down even in the early years because you got messages that it wasn't appreciated. It wasn't all those messages. And so you shut it down early, and then you get together with this person who shuts it down completely. Coming out of that shell is just an amazing thing. And I think we should probably talk about this. Some people, so we talked about, does the abuser ever change? And the answer is probably not. And so people usually ask the question, well, should I stay in the relationship, or how do I know when it's time to go? Well, I kind of touched on that. You'll know when you can't do it anymore because you can't do it anymore. But if you follow those 7 steps.
Was the 7th boundaries? For some reason, I thought we were only at 6.
6th is boundaries. 7th is consciously heal. So I call them the 7 steps to healing. And step 7 is you have to consciously choose to heal after you do these 6 things. So step 6 is setting boundaries. And hang on, my mind is like a CD on a bumpy road. If I hit a bump, sometimes I'm like, where was I? What was I doing?
I'm back there hearing you sing for a brief minute. That was kind
of. Oh, there's a whole new world. Oh, yes. So that's where it was. Thank you. So if you're in an abusive relationship, if you've done these other things and you recognize and you give it a name and you've accepted it, and then you decide and you learn and all that good stuff, you will want to have done that before you set boundaries. Here's why. Because you never want to look back and wonder, should I have done more? Could I have done more? Was it really as bad as I thought it was? And that's where the journaling comes in again. And that's why you have to be clear on what the boundaries are that you're not willing to let slide. I am not willing to be treated this way anymore. So what's my plan if they do treat me that way? And boundaries are misunderstood. People think that a boundary is, well, I tell them what the boundary is and they respect it. Well, you wouldn't need boundaries if that's what happened.
Right.
A boundary is, here's what I'm going to choose to do, because I get to choose in life. Here's what I'm going to choose to do when somebody does not honor what I've asked them to do. There's a reason in the Book of Mormon that it was a-okay for Moroni to put the kingmen to death. Why? Because they would not fight for freedom. God hates when people, governments, institutions take away agency. That's the highest principle. God does not intervene in our lives. Bad things happen precisely because there is a God who gives us and respects our agency. So the kingmen, it was right to put them to death because they weren't respecting that agency. So when you set a boundary, you get to choose. If somebody tries to violate my boundary, I get to make a decision. I'm going to walk away. I'm not going to be in that relationship anymore. I'm going to hang up the phone. And who gets to choose that? You do. But you never want to wonder, like if you set the boundary, hey, if this person yells at me, I'm going to walk away. You never want to wonder, after an argument, you walk away and say, hey, more than happy to talk to you, but not the way we're talking right now. This doesn't work for me. And you walk away. Well, if they file for divorce, which they might, because they like to do dramatic things sometimes, if you're not clear on your boundary, you're going to say, oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. Well, guess what? If this person is willing to file for divorce because you wouldn't let them yell at you, what is that telling you? And if you're clear on your boundary, you don't worry about it and you realize, okay, they've clearly indicated where they are. This is why boundaries are so powerful, so necessary, and this is why you have to do the work to get to that boundary in the first place.
Awesome. All right. So we have been talking for, wow, 53 minutes. So
oh, geez.
I know,
Sorry.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So I want to wrap it up, but I know there are still a ton of questions because I still have a lot I want to talk about because this, just as a sneak peek for next time, I want to talk about what we kind of touched on a little bit, how you know when you're ready to trust someone again, what you put there. And another thing that I wanted to raise was, what do you do when one of your kids decides, maybe subconsciously, to take over for the abuser? I'm sure that I'm not the only one that faces that. And, so I've been dealing with it in my situation, and I've got stuff that I do, but I can't be the only one in that situation. And so that's one. And there are a lot of other things. And so what I want to do is wrap it up now, and
Yep.
then I will publish this, I'll post this, and I'll ask
Yep.
for more questions, and we'll just continue the conversation on to another episode.
Awesome.
Work for you?
That would be wonderful. Yep.
All right. And so I want to remind everyone that you can find Mr. Brandon Pitkin at stopemotionalabuse.net. And he's also on Insta, which I'm never on, but stop.emotional.abuse. And Pinterest.com/stopemotionalabuse. Facebook.com/stopemotionalabuse.coach. So.
And there's some YouTube videos out there.
Yes, I watched one of your YouTube videos on gaslighting today. And so we can even get into more of that next time as well. And maybe some more of these questions, because there's just so many questions around this. It's such a huge topic.
Thank you for doing it.
Yeah, I'm glad that we're doing it. If nothing else, it's really helping me to see some of the things that I still need to work on. But I want people to know that, you know, at the end of this, when we're done with our episodes, that some of us have gotten out. And there is hope on the other side. And if you want to move forward with your life, there are people that have done it, and you can do it too. And so that's what I want to share.
Awesome.
So thank you so much,
Thank
Mr.
you
Brandon, for joining me today. Thank you for listening. And again, you can find Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness at AnnetteTalks.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube.com/Annette Talks. Follow me on Facebook, Facebook.com/Annette Talks. And thank you for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, where freedom lovers gather. All right, we're not recording.
Awesome.
Sorry, I don't want to end meeting. I want to